Emiliano Barral, captain of the Segovia militias, has fallen at the gates of Madrid, defending his country against an army of traitors, mercenaries, and foreigners. He was a great sculptor, and even in his death, he sculpted an immortal jester, and left our life as but to save it. But dry the tears upon your face, his deathless jester. Good morning, I'm Pep, and this is the Spanish Civil War. In this channel and for the next 3 years, we will follow week by week the Spanish Civil War, its battles, and the Holocaust that it provoked. This week, we'll see how the battle for Madrid continues, and it becomes the battle for the university city. But we will see also something in the international stage that will have huge repercussions. Back in July, we took the classical definition of state by Max Weber to explain that the Republican Spanish state melted after the coup, because it lost the control of the legitimate use of violence inside its territory. Well, it seems obvious that this legitimate use of violence inside a given territory needs an international recognition. That's it. There's no state without the recognition of other states. This week, the 18th, seeing that the rebels will find themselves with some difficulties to win the war, Germany and Italy finally recognize Franco's government. They internationally recognize Franco's Spain. Back in October, they refused to do so until the capital was in rebel hands. But seeing that that was not going to happen soon, they changed their opinion. Even if some Latin American countries had recognized Franco's government before, from now on, and to point out the importance of this gesture by the future members of the Pact of Steel, we will stop referring to the forces that rebelled against the Republic as rebels. From now on, we will talk about Francoists, as Franco was their leader since October, or Nationalists. This last word, nationalist, is a bit controversial. Contemporary historians consider it a propagandistic concept, fruit of the same Francoist historiography that attributes it to José Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Propaganda. This concept, nationalist, was also used by Franco himself, for example, in his last war report. Pio Moa, a historian in line with the regime, will say that since the early stages of the war, the concept nationalist was used by the faction that rebelled against the government. We've been using, until this week, the concept rebels. And we don't forget that the people we will call from now on Francoist or nationalist are in fact the ones that rebelled against the legitimate government of Spain. We've decided to change the concept not because we want to legitimize the rebel side, but because since this week, Germany and Italy opened the doors to this legitimation. As said before, there's no state without international recognition. Now, let's get back to the wet Madrid. Stop. Madrid is not wet. Well, it seems that this week General Dana, Spanish cousin of the General Winter, appeared in the capital. This meteorological phenomenon, also known as cold drop, with strong winds and short episodes of furious rain, made any kind of military operation more difficult. And it is a bit more troublesome for the attacking side, that we left last week forcing the Manzanares, capturing the Faculty of Engineering and repelling an attack from the anarchists and the 11th International Brigade that was intended to dislodge them. As you may see in our map, the Nationalists have now a foothold in the other side of the Manzanares, but the terrain in front of them is sloped. Their engineers will also have to build a ponton at the north of the Puente de los Franceses, French bridge, that will be known as the Dead Ponton, as the Republican fire was able to hammer it. That ponton bridge will become the small umbilical cord that will keep Francoist offensive inside the university city alive. The Nationalist northern flank will be covered by the 11th International Brigade. The fight from now on will be from building to building. The week starts with the fall of the Casa de Velázquez. The Polish defenders of the Dąbrowski Battalion fought almost until the last man, and the rebels continued to push. After the Casa Velázquez, the Faculty of Agronomy. After it, the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters, where the collection of up to 15,000 books will be used to build shelters during the fight. The 16th, a counterattack by Durruti's anarchists fails to stop the rebels, and by the 17th, the Francoists managed to rout them and start their attack against the Hospital Clínico, where the Catalans managed to establish a defensive line. The hospital, situated in a small hill, is a strategic position. There the fight is vicious, often hand-to-hand. Sometimes they make a hole at some room's wall to introduce a machine gun and fire before advancing. In Carabanchel, fighting from home to home, the same happens. Casualties are piling up on both sides, but the Francoists cannot afford them. They then throw more than 2,000 bombs against the city in a single day in order to soften the enemy morale and its defenses. Some regulares even reach Plaza España just to be mowed down after they create a bit of panic among the population. The fact is that since the beginning of the Battle of Madrid, the nationalist forces had been advancing, but bleeding at the same time. According to Bande, by the middle of the week, the number of Francoist troops in the university city was near 2,000. Meanwhile, the Republican forces opposing them were close to 11,000. But Franco's troops had to continue their attack. By the 18th, the fight continues around the Clinic Hospital with a vicious fight. Establishing a clear front line is difficult among the chaos. Some floors are in the hands of the loyalist troops, some floors are in the hands of the Francoists. In one occasion, the loyalist defenders put some grenades on the elevators to send them to a floor occupied by the enemy, and the nationalist bombings continue during the day, but mostly by night. The appearance of the first I-16s makes even more difficult for their crews to perform missions during daytime. It will be during this fight around the Clinic Hospital that Buenaventura Durruti, the legendary anarchist, will be wounded the 19th, just to die the next day. Durruti headed to the Clinic Hospital the 19th to prevent his troops from retreating, as his captains considered that the position was undefendable. They had already lost 2/3 of their men. There are different versions about how he died, being the most accepted the one about an accidental shot from his naranjero, a weapon that had no safety lock. Durruti was a legend, fighting for anarchism since the early 20th century, during the years of Pistolarismo and Primo de Rivera's times. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check our video about the first 30 years of the 20th century. The link will come at the end of this episode. Durruti was also one of the founders of the Avengers, Los Justicieros. Yes, a group of Spanish anarchists that planned to attempt against Alfonso XII's life. If Hulk had been among them, maybe they could have succeeded. His life would deserve a biography special, and we hope that in the future we will be able to bring it to you. The same day that he died, 52 policemen that were held prisoners were killed by the anarchist militia. As the fight continues, some battered Republican units are substituted by fresher ones. By the 19th, according to Kyle, new commander of the 11th International Brigade, a quarter of the French-speaking and German-speaking battalions were out of action, and also half of the Polish battalion. That day, the Austro-German Edgar André battalion that prevented the first crossing back the 9th of November will be replaced by the German Talman battalion, and the Polish Dąbrowski battalion that suffered daunting losses at the Casa Velázquez will be replaced by the Italian Garibaldi battalion. Kale, German journalist, substituted Kleber as commander of the 11th International Brigade, because Kleber, revered as the savior of Madrid already by the 11th, so even before the Battle of the University took place, was promoted, and now controlled a wider section of the front. We will talk about him and his fall into disgrace in the upcoming weeks. With his promotion, the 11th International Brigade's command fell on the shoulders of Hans Keil, previously commander of the Edgar André battalion, that had proved himself during the first days of the battle for the capital. We've already mentioned a couple of minutes ago the bold charge that prevented a premature crossing of the Manzanares at the beginning of November. For literature lovers, according to Saunders, Cale will become Hemingway's model for General Hans, in For Whom the Bell Tolls. Back to Madrid. The 21st, it seems that the attacking capabilities of the Nationalists are disappearing. They already have 3,000 men on the other side of the Manzanares, distributed between the faculties, but the loyalist forces in front of them have more than 3 times their numbers. And the fight in the clinic hospital continues. By the end of the week, as each side had already suffered more than 7,000 casualties, the loyalist forces will fail to retake Casa Velázquez with a counterattack, and the Nationalists will try to get back in motion, breaking the Republican lines. But we'll have to wait until next week to see what happens. This has been a brief review of what happened this week in the battle for the capital, but there are more things to talk about that happened this week. And we will start with deaths. Something not uncommon during wars. First, and remaining in Madrid, the 21st will see the death of a Spanish sculptor, Emiliano Barral, a realist sculptor that joined the assault on the Cuartel de la Montaña back in July and became commissar of the Segovia militia. Here you've got a self-portrait he made before the war. We started our episode with the epitaph that Antonio Machado, the famous Spanish poet, wrote for him. Back in the 20s, he wrote a poem about Barral. Now it was the epitaph. The times are changing. An artillery shell hit the car he was using near Usera, at the east of Carabanchel, and died of his wounds hours later. Another important death happens this week, as if the hundreds of deaths of soldiers and militias were not important. That death is important because it left Falange, the fascist Spanish party, without a leader. Yes, José Antonio Primo de Rivera will be shot this week, the 20th, the same day that Durruti dies. Back in October, a procedure started against him, his brother, and his brother's wife. This last week, the trial took place, and José Antonio Primo de Rivera was sentenced to death. Fearing that the government could try to pardon him, the execution took place as soon as it was possible. But his death, instead of favoring the Republic, favored Franco and the Francoist side. We've already talked in past episodes about the plans that were made in order to save Primo de Rivera and how Franco was against them, as he feared the effect the figure of Primo de Rivera could have in the leadership of the nationalist Spain. Franco didn't want a competitor. Apart from that, as the war carried on and the coup failed, the same Primo de Rivera showed his outrage because the Falange was used as a cannon fodder, and he even talked about mediation for a possible peace and reconciliation. Now, we have to take this very carefully. He was involved in the coup, and there were no doubts about it. And when he made these declarations, he was in prison in Republican-controlled territory, and maybe, just maybe, trying to save his life or reputation. Of course, he could have also been really worried by the bloodshed unleashed. You can decide what intentionality you want to attribute behind Primo's mediation proposal by yourself. His death will be hidden to Francoist controlled Spain because it would mean that new leader for Falange would be needed, and Franco preferred the movement to remain beheaded. The day after Primo de Rivera's death, Manuel Hedilla will become provisional leader of the Falange. Provisional, because as said, José Antonio will still have the title even if dead, and his movement will be more easily maneuvered by Franco without a true leader. On the seas, this week, an Italian submarine, the Torricelli, attacks the Republican cruiser Miguel de Cervantes, causing serious damage to the Republican ship that will have to remain under repair for more than a year. The 17th, Franco will decree a naval blockade against Republican Spain. Any ship directed to any Republican port would be destroyed. The Republican Navy has been very passive, and we could say that it's leaving the control of the seas to the more audacious Francoist Navy. After the Battle of Cabo Espartel, the Canarias was creating havoc in the Mediterranean ports. After Almería and Barcelona last week, this week it was the turn of the lovely, peaceful, small, and lacking of strategical interest village of Palamos. Ending the week as we began, we are going back to the international stage. Last week we saw how Eden in the Chamber of Commons said that there were other countries apart from Germany and Italy intervening in Spain. This week, after Franco's decree, we'll see the British Parliament trying to figure out what to do with the British merchant ships loaded with weapons that did not sail from British ports. The British Admiralty, on his own, without parliamentary orders, proclaimed that any British ship could be assailed and checked by the Francoist Navy. We'll have to wait until next week to see the British government reaction to this order. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. If you enjoyed it, share it. We have to bring light to the history of Spain. If you are able to support us in our Patreon channel, as these heroes already did, or offer us a coffee, this would also be great and would help us to carry on and improve the project. Let's make this possible all together. Thanks for your attention. Goodbye and salute.